Gracious Heavenly Father, you're so good to us, even through the difficulties and challenges that we face. And I just want to pause and say thank you again. Thank you for my brothers here. Thank you for your word that's a light to our path. Thank you for the opportunity to study the word together. And I really do pray, as iron sharpens iron, that we might help each other, maybe see some things or understand a little bit deeper, better than maybe we would have on our own, so that as a result, we may not just have a better understanding, but be convicted and wise unto how we should live with your truth, so that we can represent you well in this world and have the kind of impact that you want us to have. God, that's my prayer in Jesus' name.
Amen.
All right. Since we are having a little bit of technical difficulties, we're supposed to be starting 1 Corinthians tonight, the very first chapter. But why don't we go back to Acts chapter 18? And why don't we review where Paul comes to Corinth the first time, right? And so that'll give us a little bit of background. It'll be a review of some things we've done before, and that way when we get things up and running. And if we go through this 18th chapter really quickly, that's fine. We'll go ahead and start the first chapter of 1 Corinthians. And then next week, when we have everything up, filming and everything, we'll start again with reviewing the first few verses of 1 Corinthians. Okay. Paul leaves Athens and he comes to Corinth at the beginning of the 18th chapter. So Rick, would you read the first? And Steve, if you don't want to read, you don't have to read. We just go around the circle.
Hey, I can. Public education. It's low, but I can make it.
We just read a few verses. Whoever wants to read can. But if you would, first 4 verses for me, Rick, and we'll make some comments here.
After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. There he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had ordered all Jews to leave Rome. Paul went to see them, and because he was a tent maker as they were, he stayed and worked with them. Every Sabbath he reasoned in the synagogue, trying to persuade Jews and Greeks.
Yeah, let me kind of go in reverse order here. In verse 4, this is, as we're going through the book of Acts, we see this is his standard operating procedure, right? First place he goes is to the synagogue. And this, forgive me if I repeat myself here, but this always is I don't know, it's a point of interest to me, because if somebody were going, I was reading a book a few years ago about, Garland Bear's family. Do you remember Garland Bear? Mm-hmm. Garland Bear's family started as missionaries. He grew up in Tibet as a little person. I don't even know if Garland Bear's still alive. But if he is, he's my dad's age, right? But he was in Burma for years, in Thailand for years, and just, I have the highest admiration for him. But as I'm reading these stories, I love reading some of these stories of the early missionaries. But I think to myself, as I read these stories, I think, if I were there, I had a real heart for Koreans or whatever, and it's kind of like, yeah, I'm going to go to Korea. So here I go, I get on a plane, get my ticket, I'm in Korea, and I'm just like, okay, Koreans, listen to me. I want to tell you about Jesus. I mean, how do you break the ice? You know what I mean? What do you do? And with Garland Bear's family, they knew a little bit about Chinese culture, and so what they did is his dad played the accordion. And they knew that the Chinese people, this has got to be the 1920s, 1930s, right?
Pre-Mao.
Yeah, he knew. Yeah, a lot more people were alive then. So anyway, he knew that the people loved to sing, and he knew enough about the culture that that even the farmers and stuff like that frequently had to travel to the next town and stuff. So they had these little like motels. They weren't motels, but they had something like that, where lodging for the night, that people populated every night. It was just all over the countryside. So what he would do is he'd take his accordion, and he would go to those places and he'd start playing his accordion. And all the Chinese people just loved it, And as a result of that, he built relationships, and he was able to, teach them some Christian songs, in the Chinese language or whatever, right? But anyway, it was like, how do you build that bridge? How do you make that connection? And what always interests me is this is going to be natural for Paul, right? He's going to go to the synagogue. Why? Because he's got all that background in education. And if a guy like Paul came to the synagogue, you'd want him to be your guest speaker, right? Because this guy sat under, who did he sit under?
Gamaliel.
Yeah, like prestigious educational background, right? So anyway, it kind of, to me, it's a point of interest because one of the things, it's easy for us to sit here tonight and talk about Scripture, which is very good, because wherever we are, I don't care how mature we are in the faith, we need to keep moving a little bit closer, right? And so this is important. But how do we reach the people who would never come here? How do we reach the people who, you know what I mean? And so, I don't know, in my own life, I just think of going to the gym. Because when you go to the gym, you meet a lot of people that have met a guy a couple days ago in the gym. He had Jesus is the Lamb of God on his shirt. So I went up and talked to him, right? And it's kind of like, as I'm talking to him, I'm thinking to myself, you're not really the kind of people I want to talk to. But since you're wearing one of these shirts, I want to say, good for you. And as soon as I got into the conversation, I'm thinking to myself, maybe I shouldn't be talking to this guy because it kind of ruins my chances to talk to somebody. You know what I mean?
But his friend, his lifting partner, maybe the one you need to talk to.
Yeah. Anyway, that standard operating procedure, I think we ought to have some sort of concept of what's my standard operating procedure? How do I break into the world of people that know nothing about Jesus, the people who most need? Yeah.
I also think it's really interesting to look at the book of Acts and all the places that they go, and that there's a synagogue in almost every city he goes in the known world. How spread out the Jewish community really is. That just amazes me, because you would think they would just all be around Judah, Jerusalem.
Business, merchandising, they're built on that.
Exactly, that's really,
Yeah.
So it just amazes me that they're everywhere.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting too. It kind of emphasizes the idea that God uses adversity sometimes to his advantage, because the many times, in fact, it mentions it right here, right back up in verse 2, how Claudius had ordered all the Jews to leave Rome. So sometimes it's the persecution that gets God's people in different places, which in turn creates opportunities for the future, right? By the way, from what we know historically of Claudius and why he's getting rid of the Jews, he thinks he's getting rid of the Jews, but the problem with him is really this sect of the Jews that are Christians. He just doesn't distinguish between the Christians and the Jews, right? So it's really a Christian issue. Why? Because the Christians already are turning the world upside down, and they're making a terrific impact wherever they go. And so this is one of the early persecutions of the church. And it gets Aquila and Priscilla share in their occupation, and as a result of being tent makers, which I don't remember if we commented on this before, but sometimes translations, when it talks about tent making, probably involved a whole lot more than just making tents. It probably meant this guy was a good craftsman when it came to leather and some animal skins and things of that nature. So it wouldn't just be, you wouldn't just go to him for tents, you might go to him for belts. Whatever else you go, people who do that kind of craft. Okay, and again, moving back up in reverse order, did I already say Athens is about 45 miles from Corinth? It's about a 45-mile trip. Athens, you think of as the intellectual center of the ancient world. Their heyday was really 300 years before this, but they were still known as the intellectual center, right? So it's kind of like Harvard riding on the fumes of its past accomplishments and things like that. Okay, but Corinth, wow. I was reading a little bit yesterday, kind of refreshed my memory a little bit on Corinth. Corinth, when I think of Corinth, I often think of the Las Vegas of the first century.
You bet.
As far as,
Oh, wow.
you know, what happens in Corinth stays in Corinth. Because everybody went to Corinth to do things that they wouldn't do in their hometown, that kind of stuff. They actually had a phrase in the first century when somebody had really become, I don't know, lost all their morals and everything. They would say of that person, he's been Corinthianized. He's been Corinthianized. So that's quite a reputation. That's, yeah.
So I guess that's not good for the car when it was real Corinthian leather.
And this is, just take this for what it's worth, but we were talking about slavery issue a few weeks ago. Not at this time, but some of the most accurate information we have about Corinth would be a couple generations before Paul visits there, because we have some historical sources. Anyway, Corinth was much more populated than Athens was. You know, we usually think of Athens as the prominent city. Well, it's prominent in a lot of ways, but not population-wise. So there'd be a lot more people in Corinth. But here's the fascinating thing. In its heyday, Corinth had like 200,000 free people and over 500,000 slaves.
Holy moly.
So the slaves far outnumbered the free people. Now, just a quick reminder, when you talk about slavery in the New Testament, in fact, both New and Old, it's very rare that it's the kind of slavery that usually comes to our mind pre-Civil War. Very rare. They did have that kind of abusive slavery. That was usually associated with warfare. You know, somebody lost the battle, you take those people, and they were treated like a lower life form, right? Pre-Civil War kind of stuff. Most slavery in the Roman world, though, I'm just going to have to talk louder. I don't know when this is coming and going. Yeah, in the Roman world, many people who are doctors, lawyers, managers, businesses and stuff, you'd be a slave, right? I can talk louder than that. I don't want to talk louder.
Yeah.
I'll let that one go. Okay, but the it's not just that occupation. Sometimes we often don't associate it with slavery, would be involved with slavery. A lot of times people willingly would look for slavery kind of positions because it's like employment. Sometimes people feel like slaves, right? And in a sense, that's very much compatible with what was present in the first century, because if you, depending on the kind of slavery, if you were a slaver, you had a place to stay, your bills were taken care of, and you could actually make more money than you could on your own, right? You could, at any time in most of the slavery in the Roman Empire, buy your way out. So it's a decision you made willfully to go in, and you could easily get out of it. Yes?
Compared to the English or the European and then the debtor's prison and stuff, the people that came here as indentured servants or indentured, you know, it was stacked against you, you know.
Yes.
We jack ourselves into all kinds of bad situations with 18%, 30%, you know, credit kind of things.
Yes.
It doesn't seem to be that way for the, I mean, there are Roman slaves who become mayors.
Yes.
You know, it's quite remarkable. It's not the same stuff that I learned about, you know, coming down here to you guys in Southern Fried. You know, I got a little something for the Paul. Anyhow, so it was like almost built in, and because they had 3 hots in a cot, it's somebody's, you know, and there was trust that was built in.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
those guys. We didn't get much of that because nobody cared. You know, at the beginning of our country, it was crushing. You know.
Yes.
And,
It's quite different, and unfortunately, it's skewed people's view when they read about slavery in the Bible. But let's talk just a little bit about the slavery in the Old Testament. Slavery in the Old Testament, at the end of 7 years, you had to be set free, unless you were a prisoner of war. There was a difference there, but you would sell yourself into slavery, and many times, in fact, the Bible has a special caveat because a lot of times people didn't want to be set free. And so you would go over to the, remember how that, go over to the door, put your earlobe up there, they pierce your ear, and that'd be a sign that You, of your own free will, wanted to stay. And why in the world would somebody want to do that? Well, I think that's
It's a
a
good life.
really good indication of they knew life was better that way, right? The other factor that I know this is not popular to say, but until modern times, it's not just slaves in general, and again, slavery wasn't that bad. But if you were a woman, if you were a child, you didn't have any rights. You know, it was just this idea that you're not treating people equally, that was foreign to most of the history of the world. It's like, of course not. They're not of the right class, right? So you had the patron class. They were the movers and shakers, right? And a lot of times they would take skilled people and make them their slaves, and they'd have a wonderful life. But they would never aspire to the fact that I'm going to be a patron. Well, that's not going to happen. But I'm going to be a good doctor or whatever. I'm going to provide for my family. I'm going to have all this other stuff. But this, it was just literally a different world, a different mindset. But it wasn't the abusive, not caring for people kind of thing that a lot of people think, how can you be a Christian because the Bible endorses slavery? And the short answer is it does not endorse the kind of slavery you're thinking. It's using the same word, but it's communicating something different, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but the Bible, to me, is communicating this indentured servitude,
Right.
Yes.
which is basically you take out a contract to do something for a set amount of money.
Yes. I would, and I have, maybe I've pushed it too far, but I would say that really in most situations it's like employer-employee. Because it really is. Because a lot of times you have to sign a contract as far as you work for a certain company and things like that. And so there was this expectation in this agreement, because you could get, just like you can quit your company, you can get out of slavery in the Roman world. Most slaves could get out of slavery in the Roman world, right? And if you couldn't afford to right away, you could make some sort of arrangements and you could pay it later. But you could pay your way to freedom, or you could negotiate your way to freedom. So anyway, so that was the world of Corinth, but Corinth was known as this decadent place. So it was morality. I'm telling you, just think, and I was reprimanded for saying this before, because evidently there's parts of Las Vegas that are pretty good. No idea. Have you been to Las Vegas? Okay. Well, there must be some parts that were good. I have no idea. But
Most of the bad stuff's on the Strip.
Okay.
Or in Reno.
think of the red light district
Right.
of Las Vegas, and you get Corinth. That's pretty much what's going on there, right?
Actually, both Reno and Las Vegas don't have a red light district, because it's not
Well,
allowed in those
just
counties.
blew my illustration. Thanks, Rick.
They do allow the advertising, and it is outside
Okay.
in a different county.
Think of the wrong side of the tracks
Yeah.
in Las Vegas. You know what I'm trying to say, though, right?
Yep.
Okay, anyway, they had that reputation. So Paul, since he has the same trade with these other Christians, and they are in Corinth too, he teams up with them. I think this is hugely important too. Christians are not meant to do our work alone. God always puts us in community, right? And there's lots of important reasons for that. Again, I apologize, but I was just reading this book recently where it's talking about Christian community, and the guy who wrote the book said he was on this missions team, a few people, they were working in Africa or whatever, and one day at the end of the day, one of the other missionaries on the team sat down, and they always visited in the evening, and the person who sat down turned to him and said, "Please, tell me the gospel message again." And you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute, it's the most basic thing. We're telling people the gospel message all day long. But I love the story because the idea was she knew it was true, and she knew he knew it was true. But you know, sometimes I just need somebody to tell me again and get me excited again, because sometimes I just feel spent. You know what I mean?
Support.
Encouragement.
Yeah, encouragement, stuff like
Two by
that.
two, baby.
Especially when you're in a place like Corinth.
Yeah.
Right? Because, you know, we can say this as men too. There are things that we know is wrong, but it still catches your eye. Right? It still has that lure to it, right?
Mhm.
And so, anyway, they team together and they're going to work together. Let's pick up in verse 5 and go down through, let's go 5 through 8, Steve.
Okay. When Silas and Timothy arrived from Macedonia, Paul was occupied with the word, testifying to the Jews that the Christ was Jesus. And when they opposed and reviled him, he shook out his garments and said to them, "Your blood be on your own heads. I am innocent. From now on I will go to the Gentiles." And he left there and went to the house of a man named Titius Justus, a worshiper of God. His house was next door to the synagogue. Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed in the Lord, together with his entire household. Many of the Corinthians, hearing Paul, believed and were baptized.
Yeah, again, I'm going to go in reverse order here. Thanks for reading that. I'm going to go in reverse order here. One of the things he emphasizes is they're having an impact on Corinth, right?
Mhm.
And they're baptizing people. One of the things we're going to see in the first chapter is Paul makes a real point of the fact that he didn't baptize many people personally.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to put that against this backdrop because this is important to have the impact. You go and discipleship is taking people wherever they are, bringing them closer to the Lord, right? One of the most important steps is when you leave death and come to life, right? When you make that transition. When do you make that transition? When you're coming closer to Jesus is when you're baptized in Christ. Paul, I'm going to try to emphasize this again next week when we're actually reading the first chapter of 1 Corinthians. When Paul says, I didn't baptize many people, he wasn't saying it's not important. In fact, I think he's saying it's exact opposite. It's so important. I'm glad I'm not the one who did it because people in Corinth were saying, well, Peter baptized me. Oh no, Paul baptized me. Oh no. You know, and so they were creating divisions over who baptized them. And one of the things that Paul's saying is, we're not supposed to have any divisions. We're supposed to do this together, right? We're supposed to have this unity. So I don't want to take something super important and make it a opportunity to create division. So anyway, it talks about the people who heard, believed, and were baptized. That's one of the typical responses, appropriately so. Some of these names we're going to come back to. They're going to be mentioned again. In fact, a little bit further down in this chapter, this Sosthenes guy is also going to be mentioned, which is really curious. Don't let me forget to comment about him. Okay, when he goes, let me go back. When Silas and Timothy come, Macedonia, what churches do you think of in Macedonia? What do you think about Macedonia when you first read about Macedonia? The churches in Macedonia.
Thessalonica.
Thessalonica.
Okay, Thessalonica.
Philippi.
Okay, what? You hit the one I wanted to talk about.
They're the ones that are providing the funds for Paul most of the time.
Yes. Okay. When Paul comes to Corinth, one of the things he's going to say is, I'm not going to take any money from you guys. And one of the reasons he says, I'm not going to take any money from you guys is because they would misunderstand it.
So that's the only reason you're preaching is you've got money.
You're in this for the money. So he's not going to take money. But he tells the church at Philippi that he's accepted money from them throughout his whole ministry. So the church at Philippi is sending support so that he can actually do ministry in Corinth where they could have paid him, but they would have misunderstood if they would have paid him. So he doesn't accept pay from them. So when Silas and Timothy come from the area of Macedonia, okay, Philippi is in Macedonia, right? But the area of Macedonia, over in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, we find out they're one of the poorest regions around.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like saying, you know what, I'm going to come here, I'm going to work with you guys, I'm not going to accept any pay, because I got some churches in Haiti, and they're sending me money.
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of like saying the dirt poor people
Yeah.
are sending me money, and he accepts it. He accepts the money from the poor churches.
Sure.
Because they get it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay. It sets him free. So before he was doing the tent making, but now when they show up with the churches that we know he always accepted support from, says that at the end of the book of Philippians, 4th chapter. When they show up, he's able to spend more time actually reasoning with people and working with them. But when the opposition gets great, I'm also interested in how Paul responds to that. He doesn't just say, okay, they don't want to listen anymore, I'm going to go work somewhere else. When the Jews don't want to listen anymore, it's kind of like he puts on this display, right, of saying, how does it word it here? He shook out his clothes in protest against them. Your blood be on your own heads. What's the significance of shaking out your clothes or shaking the dust from your sandals? What's the significance of that?
Don't
Remember this?
want any of God's judgment on me when it
Yes.
comes.
When God comes and sends fire and sulfur down on this land, I don't want any of that land on my clothing. I'm getting rid of all that. So it's like, it was universally understood with the Jews that this is God's judgment be on you, and I don't want to have anything to do with you because I've done my part.
And they would really know what that means. Just the emotion is like, oh,
Yes.
how serious he was.
Yes. Yes.
Kind of like tearing
Yes.
your clothing.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, can I just say this? Doesn't this assume that it's the assumption is you have a free will choice and you could have chosen but you didn't?
Yeah.
I think so. I think this really hits Calvinism. So, yes.
We read something a long time ago that, I don't know how old Paul, I know that he's close to Jesus' age. I don't know where he was when Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem, if he was still with Gamaliel, but this phrase, let your blood, that's a Jewish thing. In one of my favorite teachers is Glenn Bourne, taught us that the blood that was laid on them when Pilate tried to wash his hands out, that blood, we need that blood. We want that blood. The blood of judgment, though, is that's the, and I don't know if Paul was in hearing of that or close when the people were screaming that out, but that's the only time it connects, with that particular phrase in judgment,
Yeah.
Oh man, that's good because when they were before Pilate, they in essence said, yeah, go ahead, we'll take responsibility for this. 50 days later, they're saying, whoa, wait a minute, why are you making us guilty of this guy's blood?
Yeah.
They're like,
Yeah.
man, you got short memory here.
Yeah.
Just previous time you were in Jerusalem, you were saying this. Okay, this whole idea though of Paul being there, I really have some strong feelings on this because to be an apostle, remember when they were going to choose Matthias? Remember what the requirements were to be an apostle?
Baptism to resurrection.
Okay, was Paul an apostle?
He says he was.
He was an apostle.
Yes.
He's going to make a real
Yeah.
point of the fact
Absolutely.
he's no lesser than the other apostles.
Right.
Okay, I know he had a special training because he mentions it in the book of Galatians, right? So he had his 3-year training just like the other guys.
He went to Florida Bible College.
Yeah. Yeah, Arabia is pretty close. Anyway, I think he was there. I don't think, I know he wasn't a follower back then, but neither was James nor Jude.
Yeah.
They weren't
Right.
followers.
But it does say that everybody who's there got baptized by John the Baptist, and Jesus baptized more.
Okay.
But he also yelled at some of those people, so maybe he was there with the one that he's yelling at.
Well, he obviously
Okay,
didn't
but
get
it also
baptized.
says in Luke 7 that the Pharisees and teachers of the law rejected God's will for them because
They didn't get baptized.
they refused
But
to be baptized
doesn't mean
by
they
God.
weren't there seeing it though. Because remember, he says, "What are you vipers doing
Yes,
here?"
yes.
So he might have been one of them.
Yes.
And then John
Could have
says
been.
the stones, Jesus, God will you could make the stones be,
Yes,
Yes.
his son,
Yes.
Children of
his suffers,
Abraham.
Yeah.
translation from East St. Louis.
Okay, good stuff. So anyway, I'm just taken with the idea when Jono was visiting. We were covering one of these passages, and this idea just hits me because if you read Malachi says, "Oh, that someone would stand at the gates and say, and shut the gates and tell people, why are you wasting your time?" And every time I read Malachi, it makes me think of passages like this, because what if one of our greeters on Sunday morning stood out front and said, "You're wasting your time, Rick, you might as well go home." You know what I mean? To certain people, are you really coming to change? And if you're not coming to change, if you're not open,
Yikes.
you're just wasting your time, just going home. And so when Jono was visiting, he came to church Sunday and he came up to Willie and he said, What did he say? Who warned you of the wrath to come? When he came to church.
He did.
Sunday morning.
He did.
What are you doing here?
You passed the test, John.
I almost left.
He's a sweet kid with a great smile, but he can preach it.
Oh, I
That's
love it.
right. I
Okay.
remember that now.
Anyway, so that again, I'm sorry it takes so long to say these things, but this whole idea, it's convicting to me because sometimes I'm worried that I'm going to hurt somebody's feelings. I don't think we should hurt people's feelings unnecessarily.
Right.
But you know what? John the Baptist did it. Jesus did it. Paul definitely did it. He said some things that were really harsh. And sometimes, we're supposed to speak the truth in love. But love doesn't mean always being
Amenable.
Yeah, you know what I mean, right? Because sometimes a loving thing to say can be really harsh. And sometimes telling people clearly you are not right with God, you are making the wrong decision, can be one of the most loving things to say. And I'm just convicted by that because honestly, it's really hard for me to tell people that. But I'm really sure a lot of guys in the gym, if they died this week, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't ever want to convey to I'm really concerned about those guys, but I don't ever want to convey, you're okay, you're a good person. I never want to convey that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? So.
I was listening to a YouTube one time, and the guy had the greatest ending. He goes, listen, God loves you so much, he doesn't want you to go to hell. Do you want to go to hell? And he walked away. Because the guy was, yelling and screaming at him, and that's what he said calmly, lovingly, but he told him the truth.
Yeah.
Also, that the Apostle Paul, I don't know how many years he's into his ministry, several, and everywhere he's gone, he says he's a Hebrew of Hebrews. He knows the Hebrew shtick more than anybody except King Jesus, and these guys are on him and aggravating him and digging at him. His cup gets full.
Yeah.
But he tried really, really hard.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought that up too, because years ago I read this article and it was written by some sociologists, and they were talking about different cultures, right? You do have to know your culture. Paul says, I try to become all things to all people. The thing that stood out to me in this study by this sociologist was that Jewish people are the most extreme on this continuum. And if I recall correctly, it was Korean people were the opposite extreme. And this continuum was, it makes me think of, Gladwell talks about this airline wreck happened with South Korea years ago. As a result of the airline wreck, they made it a policy in Korea that Koreans are not allowed to speak Korean in the cockpit. Because in their culture, you're not allowed to look at people's eyes unless you have a relationship with them, right? And you're definitely not allowed to tell somebody they're doing something wrong unless you're older than them. If you're older than them, but if the pilot's usually the oldest guy in the cockpit, right? And so
Captain.
the reason the plane went down was nobody had the nerve to tell him that he was doing something wrong. It was a respect thing. Okay, that's one extreme as far as in Korean culture, you don't even look people in the eye and you don't speak bluntly. You're just really passive and all this stuff. The opposite extreme would be the Jewish culture, where if you don't get in somebody's face and you don't spell it out clearly, and then afterwards just kind of like, well, you guys were arguing, and you talk to Jewish people, we weren't arguing. We're just having a conversation. But to everybody else, it looked like you were going to come to blows, right?
Yeah.
But I'm glad you mentioned that, because
Sounds
cultures
like New
are
York
different, and the Jewish
Italians.
culture
I'm telling you.
has always had that.
Still do.
Yeah, they still do. They still do. They have that. Calm down. Right. Okay. And that's the goal here. Whatever it takes, we've got to speak the truth in love, but that doesn't mean being passive, telling people what they really need to hear. But they're starting to have an impact, which is really interesting to me too. Because when we get over to chapter 1, one of the things we're going to find out is not many wise, not many noble, not many of the upper classes, but he's having an impact in Corinth. Let's go ahead, verses 9 through 13.
And the Lord said to Paul one night in a vision, "Do not be afraid, but go on speaking, and do not be silent. For I am with you, and no one will attack you to harm you. For I have many in this city who are my people." And he stayed 1 year and 6 months teaching the word of God among them. But when Gallio was proconsul of Achaia,
Yeah.
the Jews made a united attack on Paul and brought him before the tribunal, saying, "This man is persuading people to worship God contrary to the law."
Yeah. Boy, and isn't this interesting? It's the Jewish people. A lot of Jews are converting, but the ones who aren't converting aren't just going away. They're making a real point of making an attack on Paul. There's a couple things here that just super interest me. Maybe there's some other aspects that jump out at you. But Paul has already at this point in the book of Acts, this is still the second missionary journey, right? So it's a second missionary journey. He's been through so much. He's had to come back for the Jerusalem Council, face opposition there. Just about every place he goes, he faces opposition. This must have been really tough, though, because Jesus comes to him and says, "It's okay."
I got you.
Yeah, and that, I'm like, man, all this stuff that, I mean, you've read the list. We're going to read the list when we get over to 2 Corinthians of some of the stuff that Paul's been through.
Yeah.
He's been through so much. This must have been really, really bad.
Mm.
Or sometimes it's not so much that the persecution is awful, it's the people who's doing it. You know, sometimes when your own family turns against you or people that you thought you're really close, it just hurts to a deeper degree, right? But there must be something extra special going on to have the Lord give this vision to Paul. So he stays there 1.5 years. This Gallio, the proconsul here in Achaia, we actually have, this is one of the things that enables us to put a really firm date. Because archaeologists tell us from May of 51 till April of 52, he was a proconsul. So that's like, whoa.
Yeah, we don't get that much.
Yeah, so we can nail down with pretty good precision. So Pentecost, this is going to be some 20 years later. So the church is 20 years, and we're in the second missionary journey, right? So united attack on Paul. Any other things jump out at you in these verses?
I have many in this city who are my people.
Yes.
So I guess.
Oh, yeah.
It's a great sermon. It's really cool. That's a gift for all of us. That's neat.
Yeah, good stuff. Boy, especially when it's tough, especially when it's hard, right? Okay, so I find it very interesting what's going to happen with Paul before the proconsul. So let's go ahead, verses 14. Yeah, let's go 14 through 17.
Just as Paul was about to speak, Gallio said to them, "If you Jews were making complaint about some misdemeanor or serious crime, it would be reasonable for me to listen to you. But since it involves questions about words and names in your own law, settle the matter yourselves. I will not be a judge of such things." So he drove them off. Then the crowd there turned on Sosthenes.
Yeah, Sosthenes.
There
Good.
you go.
Good.
That's it. The synagogue leader, and beat him in front of the proconsul, and Gallio showed no concern whatsoever.
Yes. Gotta love politicians sometimes, right? He's not going to get involved in this. This is really interesting, though. This Sosthenes is going to be mentioned in the very first verse in the letter of 1 Corinthians. So, Sosthenes a very popular name? Actually, it was. So it may not be the same guy. But since he's Jewish synagogue leader, very much involved in the religious community, chances are it's the same guy. And as a result of being beat up by his own Jewish people, he was probably more open to hear what the Christians had to say, right? And so it could likely be the same guy that we're going to find mentioned in the letter. This Gallio, though, this proconsul here, this is really interesting too. I think Mark Bourne in his commentary on Acts makes the point that he was associated with the royal family, with the people back in Rome. And so when he makes this decision, he's not just making this decision. This is going to actually help the spread of Christianity, because instead of Rome getting involved in religious matters, they don't care about that. They do care if you're not pledging allegiance to Caesar. They care about that. And they care about political things. But since he, an important person like this proconsul, deemed this as, that's one of those Jewish disputes, go take care of it yourself. That actually is going to put limits on what the Jews are able to do to fight against the spread of Christianity. So this is a pivotal thing that takes place here.
It's amazing to see the dichotomy between when Jesus was getting judged versus how
Yes.
Gallio.
Oh, and sure, Pontius was
Yeah.
the same. You know, these are like minor league stuff. You guys deal with it. We're not going to please you either way.
Yes.
When does yours say? You make me read this, Bourne. The ruler of the synagogue back, Crispus. So we got two synagogues going. See,
Oh, back up in verse 8?
Yeah.
Yeah.
8?
That
The
Crispus,
synagogue leader? Could be.
two, synagogue 1 or 2 or 3 or something.
Yeah.
Or maybe
Could be.
there's double rule. I don't.
Could be, because it was supposed to be, what, 10 heads of family
Yeah.
for the synagogue, so maybe,
Or
In your population, which you laid down, which is wonderful, I dig that, 200,000 free and 500,000 slaves.
yes.
Do we have any idea Jewish to Gentile?
Don't know.
Okay,
Don't know.
okay.
Yeah, the only thing that comes to mind, maybe you think of more, the only thing that comes to mind is back at Philippi. Philippi, they didn't even have a synagogue, right? So the
Yeah.
Jewish population is probably next to none, which I think is really, really significant, because when the jailer says, "What must I do to be saved?" I don't think he had the faintest idea what
Really?
he was asking. I really don't, because if there was a Jewish synagogue, you can assume, I think it's safe to assume maybe they knew something generally about God. But when there's no synagogue, no Jewish witness there, when somebody asks a question like that, I've always looked at that as, I want what you guys have.
It's really,
You know what I mean?
and it also connects with Acts 16, where Paul's going to the Silk Road. He's tired of fighting with everybody. Oh, you white people in Europe, he wants to go where it's calm, where they've got perfume and the ladies look nice on the way down, wherever China is or something like that.
Yes.
And the dude in the dream, it's not Jesus, and he's not got pepperoni pizza.
Yes.
He's in Philippi saying, "Come over and help. Come to Europe and help us, you
Yes.
sucker. You can't go that way. We
Yeah.
need you." And that's why we're all here.
Yes.
Not in Pakistan, getting having Bible study on Tuesday night with the men. He came.
Although Thomas did go to Pakistan.
He did.
Yeah.
He didn't last very long. He didn't last too long. I heard he went down pretty quick.
you're coming at the synagogue rulers. I wonder if Crispus, because his whole entire household believed, got kicked out
Could
with
be.
Paul.
That's a good
And
point.
then this
Oh,
is the
good.
new
That's a
synagogue.
good point.
you know?
Could be. That's a very good point. And probably Sosthenes is going to be in the same boat.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
They turn on him, and according to the very beginning of the letter to 1 Corinthians, it looks like he's actually going to be one of the Christians there as well. So let's go ahead and read verses.
It gives you a lot more understanding of some of these synagogue leaders and other leaders of the Jewish faith, how much sway the people had in them. They're very, one way or another, I mean, they go left, right, at the snap of a finger.
Yeah. Yeah.
They'll be all for you, and it's, whoa.
Boom. Yeah, you didn't do your job well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you could see why they were trying to get rid of rabble-rousers like Jesus or something, It's like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do with this?
Yes.
I mean, it gives me a little more empathy for him, I guess, but not a lot.
Yes. Yes. Good. Okay, verses 18 through 22.
Is it me?
Mm-hmm.
Paul stayed in Corinth for some time. Then he left the brothers and sailed for Syria, accompanied by Priscilla and Aquila. Before he sailed, he had this hair cut off at Centuria because of a vow he had taken. They arrived at Ephesus, where Paul left Priscilla and Aquila. He himself went into the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. When they had asked him to spend more time with them, he declined. But as he left, he promised, "I will come back if it's God's will." Then he set sail from Ephesus. When he landed in Caesarea, he went up and greeted the church, and then went down to Antioch.
Very good. Okay. Again, notice his MO. He goes to the synagogue there, right? And since Steve's here, I gotta do this. Why did he cut his hair off, Steve?
Blame this kid here. I had a crew cut till I met Michael's house. Vow, what a vow. You know, I have no sermons on gluttony or haircuts, but your father took me on every opportunity. Think about Samson or any of the long-haired cats back in the day.
That's right.
I don't know. I have no answer. I'm just sitting here waiting for the judgment of God. That Mark Bourne just threw me right under the train in Florida or the land of the clans. Thank you.
Okay. The only vow, correct me if I'm wrong, but the only vow that we know is associated with haircuts would be the Nazarite vow. There may have been some other vows that people took that were individualistic, right? And they may have had some individualistic promises associated with that. But as far as vows and things that the Bible actually talks about, be the Nazarite vow. And the whole purpose of a Nazarite vow, I think, is important to get, because Paul's a Christian now, but he still keeps his Jewish customs. He's still a Jew. He remains a Jew, although he's a Christian. So he's not going to look at observing the law as something that saves him, but he's still going to observe the law because he's Jewish, right? Okay, nobody had to take a Nazarite vow. This is a free will thing. The purpose of a Nazarite vow, remember the 3 qualifications of a Nazarite vow?
No drinking.
No wine.
Yeah, no drink,
No dead bodies.
no dead bodies, didn't cut your hair,
Long hair
long hair.
at the Madison Square.
So
So
for
from
some of us, that just wouldn't work.
You ever got any pictures of this? With Paul's haircut? You could have had long hair like this dude. I'd like to have a picture to show you guys, but I don't.
You don't, because it never happened. Anyway, this whole idea of the Nazarite vow, though, why would somebody take a Nazarite vow? Well, sometimes because God told them, and that would be Samson.
Mm-hmm.
Some people actually think John the Baptist took a Nazarite vow and Samuel, but we know that Samson did. But that was because God told his parents, told Manoah and Mrs. Manoah.
There you go.
I told them.
Very accurate.
Yeah. That she wasn't even, which is really significant, because she wasn't allowed to have any wine when she was pregnant.
Mhm.
So that tells you something about lifelong, starts in the womb, right?
Mhm.
Okay. Other than when God commands it, though, why would people take a Nazarite vow? The purpose of a Nazarite vow was to make a statement that said, I know these are the standards, but for a period of time, I'm going to set the bar much higher.
Right.
I'm going to live a more difficult life. Why? Dedication, get myself closer to God. I really like that, because these are not the kind of standards that you say everybody has to do this. But every now and then you set a higher standard for yourself. Call it spiritual disciplines. You spend some time fasting, which, by the way, the Bible doesn't command fasting, but Jesus says when you fast. He assumes
Yeah.
you're going to do some things like that, right? So there are times when I don't have to do this. I'm a Christian. I'm free. But you know what? I'm going to do it anyway. Why? Because I want to please God.
So,
right?
I don't know the answer. Is this why the Catholics give up something for 40 days on Lent? Is this the basis of it, or is there something else behind it?
That's really curious, because the history of the Catholic Church is so perverted. Because
It flips on itself. It's a very excellent, question for us. It's all part of the iconic, all the cool robes and the cool hats. I like their hats, all that kind of stuff. But where else,
They're like the
I don't
priests.
know, all that stuff comes. I think it's a connection to the old, the setting up of people honoring God, and being. I used to hear this. I don't know if you guys get this down here so far, but if you go to Mexico or any Central American country for missions, or go to the beach evangelism, any of that kind of stuff, where these people live in mud houses or in real small houses. In every town, there's this beautiful basilica. But until I was down there, those people's grandpa, he had no money, but he had skill. He could carve a stone, and he did that to the glory of God, and so that his kids, it connected their faith.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to give them I'm in bad trouble with my hair. I'm trying to give them a break on this, what was going on in the Catholic churches whole I don't think the Apostle Paul cared too much about what you wore in worship or anything. We had none of that kind of stuff. It was all about the heart.
Yep.
But then in this thing, and then in Corinthians, it's about the women covering their. You got some cultural things that are there.
Yes.
And I don't have the slightest. I appreciate the freedom we have in the Lord.
Yes.
My guy that I don't know that he was a Nazarite, Elijah. The only time at Bible college days back in the 40s when I went, the King James version was Shakespeare. I like Shakespeare. I know a couple of Shakespeares in East St. Louis, but if you look at the Kings when Elijah's taking on Ahab and Ahab's son, and in the King James it says he was a hairy man. I love that very, very much. If you want, it's on a bumper sticker, and so I like that.
Everybody has their favorite verses, don't they? Yeah. Okay. The bottom line, though, is 1 Timothy 4, the first 3 verses.
Right.
About the Spirit clearly says in later times, some will come along and will abandon the faith, teaching doctrines taught by demons. Their conscience have been seared with a hot iron. They forbid people to marry and tell them to abstain from certain foods that God commanded to be received. I'm glad you bring this up because there's a distinction between if Paul, for a period of time, and most of the time, Nazarites were not lifelong. Most of the time, they just did it for a period of time.
Right.
So if this is what Paul did, he certainly wasn't saying everybody who needs to be a Christian needs to do this.
Right.
He was not saying that
Thank you.
because the Spirit clearly says that when you forbid other people, when you take that and say everybody has to live this way, you've crossed the line.
Yep.
And it's actually a demonic thing. I didn't mean to point to you.
Thank the Lord I'm over here for you guys. That's what
Yeah.
right at me anytime you say that.
All right, the only thing we have left here is Apollos. So Paul has left, and we're out of time, so that's all the further we're going to go. The rest of this chapter, though, I just appreciate that Aquila and Priscilla stay, and Apollos is preaching, but he only knows about John's baptism. And so Aquila and Priscilla invite him over to eat. And I just love this. This doesn't seem very Jewish to me, because it's not like they yelled at him.
Yeah.
They got in his face and yelled at him. But it's the old, I'll just remind you, I'll have to be corrected. I mean, we all do, right? When you correct me, this is the way you need to do it. You need to put your arm around me. You need to tell me first, Mark, you're doing a lot of good things.
And Mrs. Priscilla, she's prominent, she's prominent.
Yes.
There's a Strauss would say a shift is going on here. This is a big,
It is.
big shift.
It really is. Really is. But then they still get to the fact that, you know what, you don't understand this, and they explain the truth to him more clearly, which is so important because this guy's a very effective speaker. So if he has influence over a bunch of other people, you need to make sure he's set straight.
Right.
And
He's
so they do.
wonderful.
They bring him over to the house, they set him straight.
And he's got a blues club in Harlem. I mean, that's the greatest thing other than this.
Aren't you guys glad, Steve?
Sorry.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
It'll be better next week when the regular people are here. Channel
I'm glad
can come
you're
back.
here.
I'm sorry.
We are out of time, though. So did that actually